There we go. Hello? Hello? Hello, hello, hello? Is anybody in there? Okay, there we are. All right. You don't see me yet, but you'll see me in a minute if you're with us. If you're not, you won't see me. All right, let's see. Well, oh, yep, looks like we're on. Okay. Bring this, bring this, bring this, bring this. You would think I would have had it all set up. I've been here for like an hour and thought I had everything set up. And then it turned out, nope, didn't quite have everything set up. All right. All right, there we go. Well, I hope you can see me. Or maybe not. Maybe you're like, no, that's okay. I don't need to see you. Want to do that? Cutting off the top of my head. Let's see. Bear with us for just a second. I don't have anybody else here to help me make sure this is all right. Come on, come on. No, one more, I'm guessing. All right, we're going to try that. We'll try it and see how it goes. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the second time that I've tried to do this in an empty room. You know, it's one thing, you know, not a whole lot of people come to these. Wednesday nights, it's tough, and, you know, I bet if we did them now and people were allowed to come and you didn't have anywhere else to go, we'd have a full house. But when our lives were kind of the way that they were before all of this corona stuff, we wouldn't have a whole lot of people, maybe 10 people in the crowd. That's fine. I have no problem with that. People's lives are busy. We're busy. And so, you know, it's like it never bothered me. It is very strange talking to a completely empty room. Now, I know that there are those of you online, at least I have faith that there are those of you watching online. And as we go along, you can ask questions if you want. I've got my Facebook app up, and it will theoretically tell me when somebody says something. So, yeah, we'll just kind of go along and see how things go. We are on day 4.5, I think, of my trip to Israel. And last week when we looked at the first part of day 4, we were up in the north. Far, far, far up in the north, very close to Lebanon and Syria, and in areas that aren't technically Israel, but they are held by Israel until there's a peace treaty, at which point I have a feeling that stuff will go back to Syria or Lebanon, depending on where we were. But right now, it is under Israeli control, and so we were able to go up there and see things, and it was absolutely gorgeous. The most beautiful part of Israel that we were in. And I think day 4 may have been one of my absolute favorite days while we were there. And so we left from the Sea of Galilee. We went up to the north where Jesus went just before his final days on this earth, just before he headed to Jerusalem for the last time. For whatever reason, Jesus leaves Capernaum, which is kind of where he was at the top of the Sea of Galilee there, and he goes north about 25, 30 miles to Caesarea Philippi, and that's where we were on day 4. So we'll just go ahead and start clicking through these. This is just... I showed you guys last week when we were at what was called Tel Dan, which is the the tribe of Dan, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. It's not where they were originally supposed to settle. They were supposed to settle kind of in the area where Haifa and Tel Aviv are, but they didn't like it there because the Philistines were right there, and the Philistines were powerful. And so Dan decided that they were going to go up north to a city called Lachish, and they wiped out its inhabitants, and they set up the city of Dan there. And this kind of just give you an idea. When we would stop and all sit around, and this guy right here, there we are, this guy right here, David, he would do the teaching, and right behind him, you can't see it there, but right behind him is the Jordan River flowing by, the headwaters of the Jordan River. Absolutely gorgeous. There I am standing in front of the Abraham Gate. We talked about that last week too, 3,500, 4,000 years old. That you can see right there, and I hope you have a better view of it than I do on this screen, but that's the actual gate. They found this city buried, and when they dug it up, they were able to find this perfectly preserved city walls and the gate for that city, and it's Abraham era, and we do know that Abraham was in that part of the world at some point in his life, and so chances are Abraham walked through those gates, up those steps. Those steps are the steps that were there 3,500, 4,000 years ago. Absolutely amazing. So, I finished last week with Tel Dan. You can go onto our video page and go back and see last week's travel log, but that's where we were. You can't see it, but down, down below this to the south is the Sea of Galilee. We came all the way up, went to Tel Dan, which is also where the headwaters of the Jordan River are. And when we left Tel Dan, we drove to Caesarea Philippi, which is right there. Caesarea Philippi was King Herod Philip. So Herod the Great, he had several sons, and when Herod dies, Rome splits up Israel between his sons. And Philip is the guy that ends up with the northern part of Israel. He puts his capital, he calls it after himself, Caesarea Philippi. And like I said, just before Jesus heads to Jerusalem for the last time, he takes his disciples up there. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. This is just pictures of the countryside as we drove from Tel Dan to Caesarea Philippi. And you can see, I always point it out, but you can see the rocks that were there. That's what they built with. And so I know that if you've been watching this, you're probably getting tired of me hearing me say it, but Jesus was not a carpenter, he was a stonemason. And the reason we think he's a carpenter is because in the King James Bible, when it was first translated into English, the word actually means craftsman, and they thought it meant carpenter. So they translated it that way, and so all since then, we have always thought of him as a carpenter, but he was the craftsman's son, actually. And you could see why. As we drove through Israel, either it was limestone laying around everywhere, so you didn't even have to mine it. You could just pick it up and shape it and build yourself a place, or it was basalt, volcanic rock. And so, yeah. This is like a, can you even see that? This is like a, we're right at the Lebanese and Syrian borders. And so there are all kinds of fortresses, all kinds of strongholds, all kinds of places where the Israeli army digs in, would have dug in if there was any kind of threat of military intervention from the north. All right. We came to Tel Dan, or from Tel Dan to Caesarea Philippi, and we parked in the, if you were going to look it up now, if you were going to Google it, you would Google Banias, B-A-N-I-A-S, because the city before it was called Caesarea Philippi, it was called Panias, actually, Panias. But in Hebrew, the B and the P, it's like it's really hard to tell. It's like when you look at it, and the V too, it's like you're not sure when you see that letter, is it pronounced with a B or a P or a V? So Banias is actually Panias, which is, it was kind of the seat of Pan worship, the pagan god. And you can't really see it very well, but right over there is what's called the gates of hell. And we'll talk about that as we go along a little more, as we read what happens when Jesus brings his disciples up here to Caesarea Philippi. There's the gates of hell. If you know anything about Matthew chapter 16, you know that Jesus takes them up there, and at one point he mentions the gates of hell. A lot of people think he was talking about the literal gates of hell, but more likely he's talking about this spot right here, which is a great big cave. They are not sure how deep it goes. Out of that used to flow one of the springs that fed the Jordan River. And so the people of Panias thought that that's where the gods went to live in the wintertime, because you had to get out of, that part of the world in the winter. It just wasn't worth hanging around. But in the spring, they would come back, and this is where they were believed to come from. And you can't, I don't know if you can see it right there. There's a little niche right there. It's like right there used to be one. I'll give you an idea. This is a recreation of what it looked like. All of these little niches here, and each one, like that had the god Pan, an image of the god Pan, and that one had another image of another pagan god. And so when Jesus brings his disciples up here, they are everywhere, right? It is the seat of pagan worship in that part of the world. It is not a Jewish part of Israel at all, which is kind of strange then. Why does Jesus bring them up there just before he heads down to Jerusalem? So that's more from that same vantage point. One of the reasons that he brought us there was that there's this thing in Banias called the Suspended Trail. And it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And so you look at it where we are, it looks kind of like high desert. It's not desert like the Judean wilderness or anything, but still, it's not terribly lush up there. But we were getting ready to descend down into, you can't tell, but that's looking down those steps. We were getting ready to descend down into one of the rivers that's there in that part of the world. So there we go. We're off to go to this suspended trail. And so you can see it's like we're going way down into that canyon. Just some pictures of the stuff that I saw along the way. There's Jonathan right there. Ta-da. Okay. There's me saying, hey, I'm heading towards the gates of hell. And now we're starting to get down close to the bottom of the chasm, down close to the river. And he stopped and talked to us about Caesarea Philippi and what happens there. And that's our intrepid guide, David, who was absolutely brilliant. And it was the end of a 3-week, actually more than 3 weeks. I think he had been doing this now straight for about 32 days. And we could tell they were all kind of done. Right? They were tired. They had never done back-to-back 10-day tours before. And I don't think they'll ever do it again. But they were tired. So sometimes he would get a little snippy. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. More down to the trail. That's looking back up where we came from. Pretty flowers. Everywhere you looked, there was pretty flowers. And so now we're really getting down there close. You can see there There's a guy working on the trail. They've built this trail. That's why it's called the Suspended Trail. And so it's like you go down into this gorge where there's this rushing river just flying through, and then you walk on what is mostly this suspended platform. And so I guess they are constantly down there working on it to make sure that the tourists don't fall through. There's a picture of the river. Give you an idea of how pretty it was. Oh, there's another picture of that same guy, close up. I've got a video somewhere of that rushing by. But it's like, can you see there's moss everywhere? It's like, it is absolutely gorgeous. There we go. There's our photographer, Jeff, and he's taking pictures. His pictures were much better than mine, but he didn't send us as many as I've got, so. When we were in Israel, it was the single wettest winter on record for as long as most people could remember. And so the Sea of Galilee was up higher than it had been for as long as our guide David, who's been doing tours out of the Holy Land for I think he said 40 years. He said he's never seen it that high. And same thing with this river. You can see there's this tree right in the middle of the river. Normally it's on the edge of the river. And as I was looking at it, it reminded me of Psalm chapter 1, where the Bible says, "Happy are those who don't listen to the wicked, who don't go where sinners go, who don't do what evil people do. They love the Lord's teachings, and they think about those teachings day and night. Now they are strong like a tree planted by a river. That tree produces fruit in season, its leaves don't die, and everything they do will succeed." And this is one of my absolute favorite verses in the entire Bible. Happy, strong, and successful is the promise of Psalm chapter 1. And I don't know about you, what else is there? Happy, strong, successful. And what do we have to do in order to get that? Don't listen to the wicked. Don't go where sinners go. And don't do what evil people do. I can't tell you how many times I have talked to people who are trying to recover their lives, and they're just like, I don't understand why it's not working. I don't understand why. And it's like they haven't changed who they listen to, where they go, or what they do. And it's like you got to change all those things if you want to make changes to your life. But beyond that, it also says that they love the Lord's teachings. They think about those teachings day and night. That's biblical meditation, right? Regular meditation, Eastern meditation, is emptying your mind. Biblical meditation is filling your mind up with the words of God. And those four things are the key to success. And so when you can imagine King David sits down and writes Psalm chapter 1, and he writes about this tree that is planted by a river, because most trees, it's like if you're walking along in Israel, most of Israel is a desert. And trees kind of depend upon the rain, but not these trees, not the ones that are by the river. Happy, strong, successful. This is a plane tree, so it's just one of the kinds of trees that grows there, but you can see it's like this is ages old. They said probably 600 or 700 years old, and so you can see this big, massive trunk, and you can see where at the, kind of up there, it at one point snapped off, and now it's got new things growing out of it. Another tree, by the way, that is planted by the river. There's David teaching us. You can see he's really feeling it. And you can see Jonathan here. He's like, not so much. Not so much feeling it. So, Caesarea Philippi. All right, I'll just read it to you. This is from Matthew chapter 16. So Jesus leaves Galilee, and he goes up north, about 25 miles, to this place that is the seat of pagan worship in northern Israel. It is the the capital of King Herod Philip. And it's just, it would have been like, when Jesus says, let's go up to Caesarea Philippi, his disciples would have been like, that's worse than going to the other side of the lake, right? When he says, let's go to the other side of the lake, when he's at the Sea of Galilee, that's pretty bad. And on day 6, we go to one of those cities from the Decapolis, and it is almost perfectly preserved. It is amazing, because there was an earthquake, and it got kind of covered up, and they didn't rebuild it. But when he would say, let's go to the other side of the lake, he was talking about Caesarea, or not, about the Decapolis. When he says to them, let's go to Caesarea Philippi, that would have been by far worse to them. This would be like going to the most evil, wicked place that you could possibly imagine. And so it says, when they came to this region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. And then he asked them, but who do you say that I am? This is sort of like the disciples' graduation, right? They've been with them for 3.5 years, and he is like, takes them up there so that they can get away from, because at this point, the Pharisees and the Sadducees are following him everywhere he goes. And he can't get a quiet moment alone, and so he takes them up there. The Pharisees and the Sadducees won't follow up to Caesarea Philippi. Probably why he goes there, now that I stop and think about it. But he takes them up there for a graduation, right? This is the last time that he's going to kind of be alone together with them. And so he takes them up there where there's the gates of hell are there, pan worship, pagan worship everywhere. And he says, okay, who do people say that I am? And they start kind of rattling off what people are saying about him. And he says, okay, what about you? What do you say? Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, you are blessed, Simon, son of John, because my Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You didn't learn this from any human being. Now I say to you that you are Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock I will build my church, and all the powers of hell will not conquer it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you forbid on earth will be forbidden in heaven. Whatever you permit on earth will be permitted in heaven. And then he sternly warned the disciples not to tell anyone he was the Messiah. Now where it says all the powers of hell, literally what it says is the gates of hell. And I showed you that picture of the place that was called in those days the gates of hell. It was the entrance down to the place of the dead. And so when he says the gates of hell will not prevail against it, I don't think he's saying actual hell. I think he's talking about this place they are. And what I think he's doing, he brings them up there for this graduation ceremony. I think what he's doing is he brings them up there and says, look, even a place like this will never overcome the church. Even death itself will never overcome the church. It will take individual Christians, but it will never overcome the church. All right. And so we continued along this suspended trail. Oh, give you an idea. It was gorgeous. All right, I loved this. No smoking, no fires, no climbing, I think that must mean. No swimming, which if you saw that picture of the river that I just showed, yeah, I don't think you need that. No picking flowers and no falling. I guess it doesn't have a line through that. It just says be careful because you might fall, I guess, maybe. Oh, well, anyway. This is the Judas tree. The legend in Israel is that this is the kind of tree that Judas hung himself on. And in the springtime, this would have red flowers on it. And the legend is that it used to have white flowers, but when Judas hung himself on it, they turned red. And now every Judas tree has red flowers. And there we are at the waterfall. And you can see one of those plane trees there growing on the banks of the river. It was a good thing that it was warm that day. I mean, you can see we're all still wearing jackets and everything, but the sun was shining. It was nice, but it was like misty down there. Oh. I don't know. I hope that the sound is turned up enough that you can hear that online. Because, I mean, you had to shout in order to be able to talk to each other. There's Jonathan and I. There's our whole group. That's all of us. Except it's not all of us, really. Because a couple of us every single one of us got sick on this trip. Every single one of us that was in the bus. We were all coughing. I called it the kennel cough. And it started with just a couple of people. And by the time we had been together about 4 days, every single person in the bus was coughing, struggling with a low-grade fever in most cases. And in a couple of cases, it wiped the person out so badly that they couldn't even continue the trip of their lifetime. So there was one guy that missed 5 days of the tour. There was 3 people that missed like 2 to 3 days each. And when I came back, this is January 20. This is probably January 22nd right here. When we came back, you were just starting to hear about this coronavirus thing, right? And a few days ago, there's a group chat that goes along, that all of us kind of go back and forth with. A few days ago, one person kind of messaged everybody else, said, anybody else wonder if we had corona before corona was cool? And other people started chiming in. Turned out the first case of corona, first verified case, was January 20th. This is the 22nd. And when we were at the Sea of Galilee, at the Ein Gev resort, the same time that we were there was a South Korean group there that we ate at it was a big buffet right here in this huge restaurant, and there was no social distancing going on there, I got to tell you. And that South Korean tour group, every single one of them tested positive for corona. And so I wonder, I don't know, there's no telling for sure. I was asking Jonathan about this, we were talking about it. He said, I'm pretty positive that we've had it. He goes, I'm not positive to go and expose myself to somebody that's got it, but I'm pretty sure that, so who knows? Maybe we didn't. If the antibody test ever comes out and isn't too terribly difficult to take, then I may end up going and seeing, because, I tell you, we had all of the symptoms. And like I said, there was 2 guys that were just wiped out by it. I haven't heard how he's doing now, but from about this day, which is the 22nd, until the 28th, 2 guys, I never saw them again. They were so sick. And I haven't heard how they're doing now. I should probably check on them. Anyway, that's the plane tree. And there's our photographer, Jeff. I don't know if you can see him there. But anyway, that's him standing by the waterfall. And this is a picture of a tree growing out of the side of the rock. I just thought that was cool. I was standing down at the bottom of this cliff, and I think maybe there it is. There's that tree that I took the picture of. It just kind of amazed me. Yeah, how stuff grows. Oh, I think this is a video of me walking up the trail. And maybe it's good if you can't hear what's going on there, because I discovered as I came home and was going through all of these, I discovered I'm singing under my breath in just about every single one of them, something that has to do with whatever part of Israel I'm in. And so you're welcome if you can't hear it. That's when we got back up top, all right? So you saw how it looked in the bottom when we got back up top. This is the Golan Heights. And that up there is probably Syria. That's 100 shekels. I don't know what I was expecting when thought I was going to be spending shekels, but I didn't picture this, But that was worth probably, I don't know, I think it was like $10 or something like that. So the fact that I have a 100 shekel bill is not real fancy by any means of the stretch of the imagination. Now, this is like, we're standing in Caesarea Philippi. The next story in Matthew is the story of the Transfiguration. And Jesus, when he brings his disciples up to the north, to Caesarea Philippi, he has that exchange with them probably very near to the gates of hell, very near to that place in the city that is called the gates of hell. And after that, they go up to this place. These are the slopes of Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is actually, I think it's in Turkey. It might be Syria or Lebanon. Anyways, you can't see it. It's back kind of that direction, back there. And on this particular day, it was covered in snow, which was another one of those things. They were constantly saying to us on this tour, we've never seen this before. So like when every single person on the bus, including the tour guides and everybody, the bus driver, everybody, when everybody got sick, that was something they said, we've never seen this before. When we went out and looked at the Sea of Galilee and it was so high, they said, we've never seen this before. They were constantly saying that. And when we got up to Mount Hermon and there was snow up on the slopes, well, covering Mount Hermon, they said, we've never seen this before. But this is one of the part of the slopes of Mount Hermon, okay? So it kind of comes down. But Mount Hermon is where Jesus goes for the Transfiguration. Everybody always thinks that means he went to the top of Mount Hermon. Probably not, because in order to get to the top of Mount Hermon and then get back down to Jerusalem in the time frame that it would have required, he probably isn't up at the top of Mount Hermon. Our tour guide believed that this right here is the Mount of Transfiguration. He says when a biblical writer writes Mount Hermon, he's talking about the mountain up there and the slopes coming down. This is part of the slopes coming down. Now, you can't tell, but right there on the top, maybe you can tell if you look closely, that is a Crusader-era fortress. Really cool. But I'll show you pictures of that when we get up there. But they built a fortress atop this little mountain that to protect that part of Israel. And it wasn't actually built by the Crusaders. It was built by the Turks to repel the Crusaders. That's why it's called Nimrod's Castle. But that's probably right there where Jesus goes for his transfiguration. Oh, and this is a picture of the parking lot. And I don't know how clear that is, but it's like there's like a little store right there, and then there's like a little fruit stand over here. And the Golan Heights, the cool thing, well, and literally the cool thing is it's up so high that it gets cold enough that they can grow things that they can't grow down in the flatlands of Israel. And so they have Israeli apples and oranges that were absolutely amazing. That's our bus driver, Akmal, and he was an Arab Christian Israeli, which is very strange when you stop and think about it. But he is from Cana, the place where Jesus goes for his first miracle. He goes to that wedding in Cana of Galilee. That's where Kamal is from, and he's not Israel. He's not Jewish. His heritage is not Jewish. He is Arab in ancestry, but when Israel became a nation and his family became Israelis rather than getting out of there or trying to create a different state. Anyways, it was quite interesting to listen to him talk about what he saw as the root problem with all the stuff that's going on there in the Middle East. And there we are. That's our bus. That's our tour. Oh, he's right there. That's the guy that got sick. So he was there with us this day, but that's the last day that he was with us. And this guy, I don't know if you can see him right there. Yeah, you can see him. That's Bruce. Bruce got sick. He missed about 3 days. So anyway. So we left Caesarea Philippi, and we went to the Nimrod Fortress, cruising along like this and ending up, and you can't tell, but boy, that is a big climb. Oh, that's funny. If we had gone this way, it would have taken us an hour and 12 minutes. Only took us 9 minutes to do this. Anyways, but it took us more than 9 minutes because we stopped right about there, and I'll show you pictures of that when we get there. That's a picture of we couldn't go to the gates of hell, which was a huge disappointment for me, believe it or not. But we couldn't go to the gates of hell there at Caesarea Philippi because they were doing this, they were having this excavation there, and so it was closed off. But it's kind of back there. As we drove by, our guide goes, "Oh yeah, the gates of hell are back there." I was like, "What?" He was constantly doing that. Like I said, I think he's tired. He told us the first day, Jonathan did a lot of tour guiding up here in Alaska last summer. He did that all summer long for Premier Tours. And he said to me as we were getting ready to go on our first day for the trip, he goes, "I hope the tour guide doesn't just talk the whole time. That gets so annoying." And I was like, "Oh yeah, well, we'll see." The guy stands up as we pull out of the hotel the first day in Jerusalem, and he says, "I'm not going to sit up here and talk the whole time. I'll stop and tell you guys things every once in a while, but I'm not going to talk the whole time." And he put his mic away, and he never hardly said another word the whole rest of the time while we were driving, which was a bummer for me because you're passing so much history, right? And so what we found out that the bus had internet, and so we would all get on our phones, and we'd be like, "Hey, we just passed Moses' tomb back there," and everybody go, "Hey!" And somebody would ask David about it, and he would, we're on the Life of Christ tour, not the Old Testament tour. It's like, okay. Anyway, gates of hell are back there. Oh, well. That's kind of, that's part of the excavation and stuff. Which, by the way, when I was at Pepperdine getting my Bible degree, I signed up one summer to go. Pepperdine was part of a archaeological dig in Israel, the Banias archaeological dig. And it ended up, I didn't get to go, but that's where I would have gone. I'm like, oh man, if only. Anyway, that's as we're driving along, we're heading to that place right there, Nimrod's castle. But we stopped along the way because David, our tour guide, wanted to see this waterfall that has nothing to do with the life of Jesus, but he heard that it was, like nobody had ever seen it like this before. And I don't know if you can tell, there is no shoulder there. This is probably the most dangerous thing that we did while we were there, with the possible exception of the day that I climbed Masada. But, this was dangerous for a whole nother set of reasons. This was like cars whipping by, they're honking at you, they're seeing how close they can get to really freak you out. Yeah. And there's the waterfall. There it is. You can see it there. And it was quite impressive. Falls 400 meters. There it goes. And I think I have that picture of me blocking it. Maybe you can tell. Let's see. Kind of. When it gets down here, it keeps going. It's like, so it falls into this pool, goes down, keeps going. It was beautiful. Got to admit it. There it is from far away. And now we were coming closer to Nimrod's castle. That's just a kind of, used to be a Syrian or Lebanese village. It's still an Arab village, but under Israeli control now. Climbing up towards Nimrod's castle. This thing was built in the 13th century. Think about that for a minute. So 13th century, we're in the 21st now, so 800 years ago, something like that. And it is amazing that using those old ancient techniques to build, it's still pretty impressive. All right, this is from the parking lot of Nimrod's castle. We came up here to talk about the transfiguration of Jesus. And, like I said, our guide believed that the Mount of Transfiguration was probably where Nimrod's castle is now. I don't know exactly what his reasoning was, what his thought process was, but that's where you would go. You would go up there, not so you could go in the castle, but just so you could kind of talk about it and you could get close. I checked when I was still there, and you could, as far as the Israelis were concerned, you could pick up rocks from the ground as long as you weren't in an archaeological reserve. You could pick up rocks from the ground and take them home with you. So I brought home buckets of Sea of Galilee rocks. I've got rocks from the Mount of Transfiguration. I've got rocks from Jerusalem, from all over Israel. But I did pick up a couple of rocks while I was up there at the Mount of Transfiguration. So there's the castle behind us. We're standing in the parking lot there. Well, they are. I'm obviously on this side of the camera. And so, yeah, there's David teaching us about the Transfiguration. And it kind of give you an idea. Jesus takes, let's see, do I have something written about it? Okay. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and the two brothers, James and John, and led them up a high mountain to be alone. Okay, so Jesus had his 12 apostles, right? And then among those 12 apostles, there were 3 that he poured more of his time and energy into than the other 9. And it's Peter, James, and John. Andrew is kind of a close fourth. But those 3, Peter, James, and John, Jesus takes them everywhere with him. And sometimes he tells the other guys, you wait here. I'm taking these 3 with me. I don't know how that must have felt to them, but I guess that was kind of a typical thing that a rabbi would do. And so he takes these 3 guys with him and goes up onto the mountain. Probably left them, the other 9, down, it says at the bottom of the mountain, probably close to Caesarea Philippi, where he was just before this. So they go up high to a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, so Peter, James, and John, Jesus' appearance was transformed so that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, Lord, it's wonderful for us to be here. If you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. But even as he spoke, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my dearly loved son who brings me great joy. Listen to him. The disciples were terrified, fell face down on the ground. Then Jesus came over and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. And when they looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus. So what's going on here? What's happening? Well, he brings these 3 up here, and I think what's going on is this is his pep rally. This is like his last he's being glorified in a way. He's being given what he'll need to handle what he's heading towards next. When Bible says when Jesus comes down off of the Mount of Transfiguration, I don't remember which one of the gospel writers says it this way, but it's this very specific phrase. It says, and then Jesus set his face towards Jerusalem, which means he realized, okay, it's time. We're coming down to the very last, and so what he does is he leaves there. He goes back to Galilee, picks up whoever he needs to pick up there, and then on to Jerusalem for the last time. So when he's doing this, it's probably a month before he dies. And he goes up there, and there's this bright cloud. There's this communion with Elijah, with Moses, with his father, and he is transfigured. And there's so much in this story. When Peter says, let me make three, what does he call it? 3 shelters? Is that what he calls it? I'll make 3 shelters, yeah. Literally tabernacles. And tabernacles were the same as a tent, right? And I got to make sure I say that absolutely clearly, or else this video will show up all over the place on YouTube, and people will be laughing at me like they did the other guy that talked about Abraham pitching his tent. So yeah, you could Google that and watch that and get a big laugh. You're welcome. But that's not going to happen. Well, not going to happen to me. I'll knock on wood and pray and say, Lord, please. I'm not testing you. But that word for shelters, tabernacles, they were movable structures that the Israelites lived in while they were in the wilderness. And there is a feast that happens every year in the Jewish calendar, the Feast of Tabernacles. It is, I think it's like 6 days long, something like that. It's one of their big festivals. And it is to remind them of the days when God dwelled among them, literally tabernacled among them, and looking forward to the day when God would once again tabernacle among his people. Because there's a place in Ezekiel where the Bible says the glory of Lord left Israel. It went out of the temple and it left Israel because Israel had made its choice. Israel was not going to follow God's way. And so God said, okay, I won't force you. And so the glory of God leaves. And so the Feast of the Tabernacles was looking back to when the glory of God dwelled among them, to looking forward to the day that the glory of God would once again tabernacle among them. And Jesus comes and tabernacles among them, lives among them. They don't even, most of them don't even realize that it's kind of happening then. Now, in Revelation, there's a place, I think it's Revelation 21, where when everything is done and we get to the very end, John says, I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. And he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and Almighty God will live with them. And there will be no more crying, there will be no more pain, there will be no more suffering, for God will be with them. And so this idea, Peter gets it, right? He doesn't, it's not, when he says, let me build 3 tabernacles, he gets it. He sees the glory of God falling on Peter. He understands something here that nobody else seems to understand. I always thought he was just kind of babbling. And to a certain extent he is, but he's babbling meaningful stuff. So that's where they were, probably. Now, when he got done, I kept turning around and looking at this fortress, right, that's behind us. And David, our guide, this guy over here, he was like, don't look over across the street at that fortress. There's nothing for you there. It has nothing to do with Jesus. And I'm like, except that you said that's where Jesus was standing when the whole tabernacle, the whole transfiguration thing happens. Can't we go up there? And no, we can't go up there. We don't have time, which is funny. If you were with us the first week, and probably you weren't, but if you were, I told you that like Michael Card, who this is his tour, right? He's not the guide, but Michael is the one who puts it all together. And they're following his plan, right? We're following the story of the life of Jesus as we go throughout Israel. Michael said the whole reason that he put together a tour was because he heard one time a tour guide say to a group of people, you don't have time to do that. They were in Capernaum. This lady wanted to go see Peter's house, and he said, no, we don't have time. Get on the bus. And Michael said, that was just heartbreaking. I felt like that should never happen, and so I want to make sure that we do a tour where nobody ever is told we don't have time. But I don't think this guy got the memo, because he was constantly telling us we didn't have time for stuff. Constantly. And it became a joke amongst everybody in the bus, And on this day, it finally kind of boiled over with a few of the people. And it's because we kept turning around and looking at that thing, right? And we're like, that looks so cool. Can't we go up there? No, you can't go up there. And somebody says, well, I got to go to the bathroom. And somebody else says, yeah, I got to go too. I was with a large group of mostly people that were older than me by 15, 20 years on average. And so they were constantly having to go to the bathroom. And so he's like, all right, 10 minutes. Everybody on the bus in 10 minutes, right? And so they start walking over to the bathrooms, which are, you kind of see them right there. There's a little... it looks like a stone fortress almost. That's the bathrooms. And so me and Jonathan, that's me going, oh man, I'm so close to this castle and I don't get to go up. And then this is me, like, he's like, you got 10 minutes. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll walk over kind of to the edge of the parking lot maybe, and I'll take a picture. And so I do, and then some people see, and they kind of come along and they go a little farther than me. And that's kind of backed up a little bit. And Jonathan says, hey, do you think he'd mind if we went over and read that sign? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't think so. I mean, as long as we're back on the bus in 10 minutes. And so we went over to the sign, and there it is, the largest, most impressive surviving medieval Muslim fortress in Israel. Tells all about this amazing fortress, right? And we're standing there, and some other people come over to take a look at it. It's like the sign would have been down kind of below this a little bit, and then there's these steps that go up towards the fortress. And so it's like, I'm looking at my watch. I'm like, okay, we're at 5 minutes. There's the northwestern tower. Fortress has these 21 towers. In 1275, the northwestern tower was expanded by Billick, and 2 stories were added. I went up on the steps. I was like, why not? We'll be back. And so then I was like, okay, it's time. And so that comes after this. So we run back over to the bus, and we get there, and our guide is nowhere to be seen. And our bus driver has it's not the hood of the bus. It's kind of the back hatch or whatever. And he's working on something. And we're like, oh, what's going on? And he's like, oh, something's wrong, and it's going to be another, I think he said 15 minutes. And we're like, really? And he says, yeah. And I was like, can you say that like out loud to all the other people that are standing around? And so Kamal kind of laughed. He goes, he had this real thick Arab accent. He's like, hey, everybody. That's a terrible accent. I don't even know what that was. Hey, that was the guy from Star Wars, right? The guy that owned Anakin. I can't remember what his name was. Anyway, maybe he had an Israeli accent and I didn't know. But anyways, he yells out, 15 minutes. We're going to be 15 more minutes. And so all of us go en masse across the street again, right? And the guide's not there to tell us we can't. And so we go back over and we walk up. Well, let me show you. So we walked up these stairs and then up those stairs and into the fortress. And there's this, that's one of the, aquifer is not the right word, cistern. It's a cistern. And so they would fill it up with water, and when it was full, they could keep 100 people there for like years if they had that thing full. And it rains quite a bit up there in the Golan Heights, so it's not like the desert where they have to be real careful with it. And I'll show you in a little bit what one of the cool things they did with it was. So that's up on top, probably getting very close to the place where Jesus was transfigured. And so I'm picking up rocks. I brought back pounds and pounds of rocks. If you're like, oh my goodness, I would love to have a rock from the Holy Land, let me know because I've got some. The towers protrude from the wall, enabling control all along it. They contain firing slits with high, narrow windows, protecting the archers as they shoot at the enemy. And so that's what these are. These are the arrow slits and stuff. And the towers stick out a little bit so that they can shoot back at people are trying to climb the wall. And they can, and it just keeps going up, and then it gets to the very top, and it's like, and so if these walls are breached, they can retreat back up to this part of the castle and hold out even longer. It was remarkable. There I am going, I couldn't imagine trying to attack these walls and take out whatever army is in there. But this fortress fell over and over and over during the Middle Ages. So it was built by the Turks, by the Muslims, to repel the Crusaders, and the Crusaders conquered it at some point. And then the Crusaders set up camp in there, and then later on they were conquered by somebody else. It's just, can you imagine trying to come up that mountain and trying to climb up here and attack these walls? I can't even imagine. So as I stood up there, not only was I thinking about the transfiguration, but Psalm 18 verse 2, where the Bible says, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold." Now that last word, stronghold, in the King James, it uses the word strong tower. Another translation makes it high tower. And I think Cutlass is the group that has a song, You are my high tower or strong tower. Anyways, fortress over me. Awesome song. It's based on Psalm 18 verse 2. And as I was kind of getting ready for tonight and I was looking at it again, I thought, boy, that is, if you were, I almost said here with us last weekend, you wouldn't have been here with us last weekend. If you were online with us last weekend, I talked about the 5 steps to overwhelming worry in our lives. Don't always choose joy. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Thank God for all He's done, and think about the good things. One of the things that over the last several weeks, as things have woken me up in the middle of the night and made it hard for me to get back to sleep because my brain started spinning out of control. And I'm not somebody that normally happens to. And so I imagine if you're somebody that ordinarily happens to in the best of times, you're probably experiencing it too. Let's just say that. But one of the things that I talked about over the last 2 weeks was this concept of biblical meditation. I talked about it earlier tonight when I talked about Psalm chapter 1. But basically, biblical meditation is filling your mind up with the things of God. Not trying to empty it. That's Eastern meditation. But biblical meditation is filling your mind up with the things of God. And so having Scripture memorized is really important when you wake up in the middle of the night and worry is starting to run rampant in your brain. How do you calm your heart? How do you calm your mind? Well, you could get out a Bible and you could sit down and read it. Or if you've got some stuff in your brain, then you can start going through it and thinking about it without even turning on a light, without even getting your phone out and taking a look at it and trying to read it. And so the reason I give everybody suggested memory verses at the end of every lesson is because if you have those things memorized, then when you wake up in the middle of the night, you can start running them through your brain. And I got to tell you, Psalm 4 that we went through last weekend is my go-to. I mean, I'll just lay there and I'll just start going through. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Don't forget to ask God for what you need. Don't forget to thank Him for all He's done. If you do this, you will experience God's peace, which is far greater than the human mind can understand. And His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. And if there's anything good and admirable and excellent and praiseworthy, think about that. Then the God of peace will be with you. And I will just lay there in bed and I'll just run those things through my brain. And I will often fall asleep over the last 2 weeks at 4 o'clock in the morning, having been awoken by my stress and my worries and my fears, just reciting those things over and over and over again. But this is another one that's pretty powerful. If you're looking for a verse to memorize so that when you get woken up in the middle of the night, you can just start running it through your brain to find some comfort and meditate on that, this is a good one. But what exactly is it promising? Is it promising that if the Lord is your rock, your fortress, your deliverer, that nothing bad will ever happen to you? Well, no, it can't mean that, because throughout history, the people of God, from the time of King David until now, including the days of the New Testament, bad things have happened to God's people, right? So, one of the things that concerns me during times like this, right? Now, this is obviously unprecedented. We've never been in a time like this. But one thing I see on a lot of my friends' pages is like prayers that say, no plague will impact me. No virus will come in my family, my city, my town, my nation. And people will pray these prayers. And they're based on a passage out of the Bible where it talks about that. No plague will overtake you, which is a specific promise to a specific person. But we take those promises and we apply them to ourselves. The only problem is, throughout history, the people of God have died of plagues. The people of God have died of viruses. The people of God have died from persecutions and every other aspect you could possibly imagine. It can't be promising that nothing bad will ever happen to you. So what is it promising? Man, I wish I had people here in the room so I could sit back and wait and let people start answering, maybe this, maybe that, maybe... That's one of my favorite things about Bible study, is to ask a question and then just sit back and let the silence kind of reign until somebody finally answers. But what I think it's saying is, even when it doesn't look like it, God's in control. And even if something bad happens to me, that's just this life, right? But the Lord is my rock. The Lord is my fortress. The Lord is my deliverer. My rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. And that's what I kind of picture at night when I'm thinking about that. Not necessarily with my physical life. Doesn't mean that I won't catch the virus or that somebody that I love won't catch the virus, but it does mean that ultimately this is me. And eternally, nothing can be taken from me that's really and truly important. There's a story in the book of Daniel about these three guys, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. They're Jewish young men that are carried off into captivity to Babylon, and they will not bow down and worship the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And so Nebuchadnezzar has this fiery furnace built. It is so hot that if you got close to it, you would die. And he tells Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, either bow down and worship me or I'm throwing you in that fiery furnace. And what they say is absolutely fascinating. They say, our God is able to rescue us from that fiery furnace, O king. But even if he does not, we will never worship you because our hope is in the Holy One of Israel. And I think that when we make these claims about, God will never let anything bad happen to me, I agree that God is able to rescue us, that God is able to save us in this physical world. But we forget that last little part, but even if he doesn't. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that skeptics have with Christianity, is they hear us say things like that, my God is able to save me. And then when we die anyways, and it appears to them that God didn't save us, which is, I don't think, true. I think he's ultimately saved them at that point in a way that they're the only ones that can truly understand God's salvation at that point. But it looks, for all intents and purposes, from our earthly perspective, like God didn't save that person. And then we're shocked. How could God let this happen to us? How could God let this? And the Bible is filled with all of these places where Peter says, don't be surprised at the fiery trials that you're going through as though something strange were happening to you. James says, count it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when multifaceted troubles of every kind overtake you, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, and that endurance then will grow and you will become strong and able to handle everything. But trouble and fiery trials, they're part of this world. One more story and then we're going to stop for the night. just after, well, probably a year or two after Jesus' ascension. And the church in Jerusalem is growing, and it is exploding. And King Herod, not Herod the Great, but one of his sons, this is the one that gets put in charge of Jerusalem, he arrests Peter and James. Remember, Peter and James are two of the three, Peter, James, and John, that get more of Jesus' attention, more poured into them than the other 9 apostles. So Peter and James are arrested. He kills James immediately. Says, puts him to the sword, which means he beheaded him. And when Herod sees how happy this made the Jews, then he thought, I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. So he says, take Peter to jail. We'll kill him tomorrow. So they take Peter away to jail, and that night an angel comes and releases Peter and walks him out of the prison, and Peter escapes, and we tell this amazing story about God's power to save his people. And Amy Grant writes a song, Angels Watching Over Me, and all of that is true. But if you're James's mom, what do you say about God's power to save his people? What do you say about what that all means if you're James? And that used to really bother me until I started to think, I have a feeling if we get to heaven and we go and we track down James and Peter and we ask them, which one of you got the better deal that day? I have a feeling James is going to be like me. I had the better deal that day. And look at Peter, and Peter, I think, would be like, yeah, he had the better deal. I got crucified upside down. After decades of persecution and being chased and harassed, Peter finally is crucified upside down. Whereas James, it's over like that. But it's very strange. Why? Why did that happen? Why to James, not to Peter? Why did Peter get rescued and not James? And the answer to that question is, I don't know. God's the only one that knows that question, or the answer to that question. But I do know this, that even for James, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield, the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. And when I wake up in the middle of the night, that's what I count on. No matter what happens to me in this world, no matter what happens to me in this life. And believe me, I pray that God will keep me safe, that God will keep me healthy, that he will keep my family safe and healthy, that he'll keep all of you folks safe and healthy, that this will end soon. I pray it all the time. But I know, even if he doesn't, he is still the rock, the fortress, the deliverer. And when I stood up there on that, that's as far as I got. I didn't get up to the top of the fortress because it was getting close to that 15 minutes, And so I looked around a little bit more. It's more about Nimrod's fortress. When it came to be 15 minutes, getting close to 15 minutes, I said to Jonathan and to the people that were up there with us, I was like, all right, we got 3 minutes. We should head on back down. And everybody's like, okay. Well, this lady here, that's the opposite way from going back to the bus, all right? The bus is down, like, behind me in this picture. This is Jean. Jean Ploon, I think was her last name. Anyways, Jean. She sat right behind me in the bus. Her wife, her husband, reminded me of Will Ferrell. They were awesome. And they were always behind me and Jonathan in the bus. And she was hysterical. But I said, Jean, it's, 3 minutes till we got to be back. We're heading back the other way. And she said, all right, I'll see you later. And she just kept walking. And I was like, well, she's not in my jurisdiction. And so we turned around and we went back to the bus. And we got on the bus. And David, our guide, got on the bus. And he was like, all right, let's go. And I was like, you might want to count. I have a feeling one of us might be missing, And he was like, no, we're all here. And I was like, And the guy behind me was like, yeah, my wife's not here. And he goes, well, where is your wife? He goes, I don't know. I went to the bathroom and I came out and she was gone. Very smart man. But she, maybe 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, she finally came back, got back on the bus. And our tour guide was just fuming. And he kind of made some kind of a snarky comment to her when she got on the bus and sat down. And we got started, and I said, ooh, you got in trouble. And she goes, I don't care. I'm not going to fly halfway around the world and not get to look at a castle. So when I said that it kind of reached a burning point, him always telling us that we didn't have time for something, this was a big part of it. There was almost a massive revolt on this day as we continued on through the tour. That says danger, abyss. In other words, don't go over there because you could fall a very, very long way. This is a fountain. When I showed you that picture of the cistern, it was like full of like really scummy water when we were there. But this used to have water that would flow through it. It was like a little fountain. Must have been absolutely beautiful because they didn't have to worry too much about water up there. That's an animal watering trough that is from the 13th century. And there's one of those arrow slits that I was telling you about. So you'd stand inside of there and people could shoot. They'd have to be a really good shot to hit you. But you could just, I think there's a picture of so there it shows him, the guy standing there getting ready to fire at the people that are coming up the hill. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. This is me heading back down, going to get back on the bus. Olive trees down there at the foot. So yeah, after that we went to Majdal Shams, which is a Druze village, D-R-U-Z-E. It is a people group that kind of it descends from the Muslims, but it kind of has this faith that is partial Muslim, partial Judaism, and partial Hindu. It's very strange. And not a lot of them, because they were constantly getting wiped out by Muslims if they were in control, or back in the days when the Christians were killing people who they considered to be infidels, they would get killed by the Christians, and that's where we went for lunch that day. And it was fascinating, and that will be next week. I'll show you that next week. But for this week, I think we're done. So if you just caught us here at the last, you can go back and watch it. It'll be posted on the Facebook page and I think the YouTube page here very soon. But thanks for hanging out with me, everybody, and I'll see you on the weekend.